Hi everyone. Thanks for joining another STEM Women Hangout on Air. And today we have our guest Erin Kane, who is a physical anthropologist studying primatology. She'll be talking to us today about her fieldwork and her career. So let's dive straight in. What is physical anthropology, and can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So physical anthropology is one of the kind of subsets of anthropology. You can study humans and everything about humans from so many different perspectives. That physical anthropology sort of takes the biological and evolutionary approach to what humans are up to. So I study it from the perspective of putting human ecology and human behavior and anatomy kind of into a context with all of our closest living relatives. So just like cultural anthropologists are contextualizing what humans are up to by looking at different cultures, I contextualize us biologically by looking at primates.
And so you talked about, I'm just going to jump on something you said quickly. So you talked about the ecology aspect of your work. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in how changes in the environment affect behavior and like health of primates. So right now my dissertation research is looking at how what primates are eating changes kind of annually. So when different trees are fruiting, there's different foods available, obviously. And then, so I'm doing a lot of work trying to figure out what is available in a forest and how you can talk about it, so from a nutritional perspective and from a kind of properties of the food perspective. So how difficult is it to eat something? Do you have to work really hard to open the shells or something like that? And then I wanted to see if that affects their health, and so looking at stress and see if it's more difficult to be a monkey successfully when food is harder to open or something like that.
How do you stress test a monkey?
Well, I do it really through a proxy, so I'm looking at fecal concentrations of cortisol and our glucocorticoids, so just kind of the stress hormones and then the signature that leaves in poop. So I get to spend most of my career chasing monkeys and waiting for them to poop useful places.
Yeah, my PhD involved studying sheep poop, so yeah, we have something in common there.
Oh, that's good. But somebody originally went out and gave tests. Oh goodness, here comes my cat. Sorry. So somebody went out and gave ACTH challenges to the monkeys or to different primate species, where you inject them with something that's going to raise their stress levels. Sorry, Triceratops wants to be part of everything.
So, what was it that led you to initially become interested in monkeys? What was your career path?
Well, when I was like 12, I was in the library with my folks, and I couldn't really find anything interesting to read. And so my dad found Jane Goodall's first book, In the Shadow of Man, and was like, oh, you should read this. You might think it's interesting. And so I read it and thought it was really interesting and decided that was what I was going to be when I grew up. And I was really lucky. I had an awesome 8th grade science teacher who actually took me to see Jane Goodall speak when she was at his college. And I was able to take all sorts of really interesting science classes through high school. And then, I sort of realized I wasn't as interested in the ape behavior stuff. There are so many people studying chimps and gorillas and stuff that there's so much less information about a lot of the primates in the forests. And so I got really interested in the group that I study now, which are, they're called guenons. They're kind of like the little kind of cat-sized monkeys that every forest in Africa has a couple of. And I think they're really cool because they're a really good analogy for what was going on in human evolution right before you have Australopithecines and kind of the early hominids show up, because you have a whole bunch of early ape species that are in forests wandering around doing different things, and then one of them heads off into a savanna and turns into humans eventually. But because of all of the evolution happening in rainforests, it's been most of the bodies kind of decompose before fossilizing, so it's hard to reconstruct these early ape populations. And so I think the guenons, because there's so many of them, they're diversifying in sort of the same way that early humans did, or early apes, that they're a really good analogy, and they're pretty well understudied. We don't know a whole lot about most of them, so.
So go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I can see a lot of applications for your work. You know, you talked about the ecology and health aspects, and obviously this may be a way to extend our knowledge of evolution.
Mm-hmm.
What other uses do you see for your outcomes out of your work? Because I imagine there'd be a lot.
Yeah. I think there's a really good application to the kind of understanding how animals are dealing with climate change. So the forest that I work in, people have been there since the early 70s doing research and getting kind of year-to-year pictures of how the forest is producing, so individual trees and individual species, how productive they are in terms of fruit and leaves and flowers on a year-to-year basis. And so one of the things I have to do this summer is go through the last 15 years of that data and see if there's any changes. But because I've got this really detailed ecological information, and then I'm going to have all of this health data, or well, stress data from the fecal samples, I think I should be able to tell how, at least in the very short term, these fluctuations are affecting the primates, and if we can see changes in what they're eating on sort of a longer term basis. And you know, this is a relatively seasonal environment, but it's right in the middle of the equator, or right along the equator, and you know, there's still definitely effects of climate change that we're seeing, and the seasonality is getting more pronounced, I would say. So I think it should have broader applications.
Awesome.
So you recently got back from doing fieldwork in the Ivory Coast. Can you tell us a bit more about what that was like?
Yeah, it was great. It was long. So I was in Cote d'Ivoire from June 2013 until the very end of March, this past March, so 2014. And I was in the forest just about every day. You know, we would wake up around 5, be out with the monkeys by 6:30 or 7, and then spend all day with them doing their research. But one of the things that was really cool this trip is because I was there for so long, as opposed to my last trip, which was only about 3 months, I was able to kind of get out of the forest a little bit and actually spend time in the villages and get to know people who lived there. And we sort of laid groundwork for bringing some of the top scholars from the local primary schools into the forest next time I'm there, so they get a chance to see what it's like in the forest. Most of them, you know, live literally right on the border of this national park, but they never ever get to go in and see it, and so for them the only real context that they have for primates or pygmy hippos or something like that is as bushmeat.
Right.
So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah,
but
that's
yeah, it was really nice to be able to interact with people outside of the forest too.
Yeah, and it's really cool that you're using it almost as an unofficial teaching moment, you know, to tell people, hey, this is what I do for a living, let's get you excited about the same things as well.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's something that a lot of primatologists are doing because really there's nobody studying primates who's not dealing with either endangered or soon-to-be endangered animals that are losing their habitat. And, you know, for a while you could go in and just be in the forest as an American or a European and then disappear. And everything was still working out okay, but now we're seeing more and more effects of habitat loss and poaching. You know, we were hearing gunshots in the forest maybe once or twice a month, so there is definitely, you know, stress on these animals, and being able to bring people into the forest and give them a chance to kind of see what it's like when there's nothing terrible going on, I think is really important.
Yeah. Was it gunshots because of poachers, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
The area, so there's kind of a main research part of the forest. There's people studying chimps with a separate project, and then the monkey project going on. And so there's a pretty good density of researchers, and so the poachers don't go there. But as, you know, around Christmas, they knew that there was nobody in the forest, and so they started coming closer and closer to our camps and stuff like that. Yeah.
Were you able to, I mean, you talked about people having to shift their thinking of what primates represent, but were you able to work with the local physical anthropologists, and did they have any insights about the cultural dynamics?
Yeah, so kind of unfortunately, being an ecologist isn't really a high status. If you're going to go to university, you want to be something a little bit more useful, like a doctor or a teacher or somebody. But there are some people who are really, really interested in primates, and a lot of them are from the city, from Abidjan. And so while I was there, there was a PhD student who was also in the forest for the first time, an Ivorian guy. And so he got to show up in the middle of the rainforest in his jeans with his fancy iPhone and stuff, and was totally taken aback. It was kind of funny because he's Ivorian, he should be used to this, right? But most of it isn't rainforest. But it was great because the professor, the Ivorian professor, who sort of runs things between the American project and the Ivorian body that runs research in the forest. He did a big student education project, and watching him interact with the kids was really cool because he was able to bring this personal and kind of nationalistic approach to conservation, whereas I can be I think they're cool, I'm here from America to study your monkeys, but Kareem was able to say, this is your heritage, this is our heritage, and we get to protect it. And he had sort of more of a moral authority than I do, right? I can't really go in and be this is bad, don't, destruct the forest. But Kareem could bring it in a different way. So I think as kind of we move forward in the near future, having local people doing the conservation and doing the research is going to be the way to go, because, it's expensive for me to go there. Probably the money that I spend going to the forest is better put bringing Ivorians or other local people who are trained to go into the forest also and do this research.
Awesome. So if you were giving tips to young girls, young women who were going to follow your career path, what sorts of things might they have to think about?
Let's see. Well, I think in terms of classes to take and stuff like that, you can never take too much statistics. But really, I mean, there's so much out there, and sometimes I kind of regret studying primates because primates are really cool, and I really love the research that I'm doing, but in the same forest there are pangolins that nobody's really studied in depth, and there are all of these really cool other mammals that nobody knows about. And then even beyond that, there's I'm sure if somebody did a survey of the insects, it would be hundreds of new species, just because nobody's really done that work. So things like primates and carnivores are really cool, but you can make a much better niche for yourself and become a much more important person scientifically if you take kind of a path less traveled, I think. So I mean, I love what I'm doing and I don't regret it, but I think that would be a really cool way to go if you want to kind of make a name for yourself scientifically.
That's interesting you're saying about having a niche. I think it's not something that we tell our students enough about. It is about not just following your passion, because that's important, but also what type of career do you want to have? What type of work do you want to be doing?
And so one of the things that I'm really struggling with now is how do I, so I've got all of these skills as far as observational research, and hopefully eventually I'll have skills at analyzing hormones and these nutritional things, and I'm learning biomechanics, and how can I then take it from this really well-known relatively group of animals and apply it to something either closer to home or less well-studied, or both would be interesting.
So the last time we talked to you, you had some pretty gory horror stories. Do you have any new ones from your trip?
Yeah, well, I guess the biggest thing that came out of my trip was I got malaria.
Yeah.
So that was I can highly recommend not getting malaria to anybody who goes to tropical areas. Take your anti-malarials for the full course.
Just curious, did you not take the anti-malarials or get lazy with it?
I was taking anti-malarials the whole time I was there, and then once I got back, you're supposed to continue taking it for another month. And I only took it for about 2 weeks, and then 2 days after I stopped taking them, I started getting all of the symptoms. don't follow my example. But the other really exciting-ish thing that happened while I was there, so right around Christmas, I was the only student who was still in the forest. So the way that our research area is set up, we have Ivorian field assistants who live in the forest for like 2 weeks at a time, and then they spend 5 or 6 days with their families. And they're in a camp maybe about half a kilometer away from where the students' camp is. So I was the only person in the students' camp, and I was asleep and, tucked into my mosquito net, because we keep mosquito nets over our bed so that, cockroaches and snakes and things can't get in. But yeah, so I fell asleep at my normal time, and then maybe about an hour later, I woke up because it felt like there was something stinging me, and I looked across the room at the back of my wall, and it was black. And then I realized that I was covered in army ants, and my room was covered in army ants, and they were in my hair, and they were in my nose, and they were in all of my clothing, and covering the rest of my house. So I fortunately had my shoes in the bed with me, because I found things in my shoes previously. And so I put on my shoes and I went out, and after 3 hours the army ant swarm had moved on. But then for really the last 4 months of my trip, I would pick out dead army ants from various articles of clothing. I washed my sheets 4 or 5 times, and there were still dead army ants stuck in folds. It was really horrible. But I didn't have any botflies this time.
Yeah, that's always a good thing.
So, Erin, we're going to switch gears, although I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to get that out of my head. We wanted to speak to you about an ongoing study that was published in Scientific American, and the study showed that 59% of anthropologists face sexual harassment and a sexual assault in the field, and they also found that women are 3 times at risk of sexual harassment in comparison to men. And the really alarming thing was about 50% of the harassment was coming from senior researchers imposing themselves on junior women. So is sexual harassment an issue that's explicitly discussed in anthropology courses, and how can we start to think about increasing the safety of women researchers in the field?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So I was lucky enough to be at the physical anthropology meetings when Kate Clancy presented the paper, and it was a really, really interesting talk. It was pretty early in the morning on the last day of the conference, and it was really, really well attended. But it was basically all women who were there. There were a few male faculty, but it was pretty much all women, and it was predominantly, I think, students more than professors, which was pretty depressing to see. But the research that she presented, I think, was really important, and I was, followed some of the conversation about it because, it's something personally relevant. And it's been interesting to see the range of responses to it. Somebody, I think on Savage Minds, which is an anthropology blog, somebody was saying, well, this is the same rate that people are sexually harassed in the real world, so should we really be concerned that it's, do we really need to do anything?
It's just normal, right?
Yeah, right. And I was like, wow, well, that's a really horrible attitude to take about this, because you'd like to think that, in an academic setting, and this is, you shouldn't be expecting this rate of sexual harassment and assault. But I think one of the most important things that's come out of it is that it has kind of opened up conversations about it in departments. So my department chair emailed out the original paper and some of the commentary around it. And he's, I don't know, probably in his late 50s, early 60s, and male. And I thought that was really awesome. But I think kind of the best outcome of it is, yeah, like I said, to kind of have it be something that people talk about. It's, I work in places that are pretty patriarchal, pretty traditional societies where I'm commonly the only woman, or there are only white women, or European or American women, and nobody in any of the field sites that I've been to before I've gone, none of my advisors have been like, oh, by the way, this might be an issue. And it has been an issue in every field set I've worked at, either in terms of interacting with the kind of folks who live around us, or in some cases the professors who are associated with the project. So I don't know, but I was so happy that there is Kate Clancy, I think, is one of the really important anthropologists, physical anthropologists, who's talking about stuff, not just about women's issues, but her research is really cool too. And it was really, really awesome to see a professional, like a tenure track professional faculty member who's thinking about what's going on for the graduate students and sort of the less kind of permanent people in the field. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is about, we come back to this issue quite a lot in STEM Women. It's about people at every level being aware, but also having conversations, and really senior people need to stand up. This idea that it's just normal, everybody goes through it, and you just figure it out as you go along, it just isn't good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think that's
you said that it's something that you've experienced every time you've been to the field. How did you deal with that? Because if it's something that everyone deals with, maybe there's someone listening who could, use your experience and learn from, okay, right, this is what I should do next time I have to deal with this.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, usually it's pretty low key, I guess. I think the most frustrating thing that's happened was when I was working in Kenya. I was in a paleontology project, so we were in the middle of the desert, basically walking around all day looking for fossils, and I wore shorts because it was really warm. And one of the professors running the project called me aside and told me that my clothes were really distracting to the people who were working on the project. He implied the Kenyan men who were working, but I was like, really? This is the conversation we're having? And there was a woman who was also there, a professor, and she was like, well, actually, I think, everything is fine, and you don't worry about it too much. He's just old and uptight, and don't worry about it. And so, on the one hand, I really appreciated that this professor was there to be like, it's not a problem. Things are fine. Keep going the way you're going. But, I think there needs to be a lot less kind of presumption, rather, on the part of professors to be policing what people are doing if it really isn't actually hurting anything. On the other hand, having people around who are explicitly there kind of as an authority figure who's running the project or who's clearly in charge would be really helpful, I think, because a lot of times these are sort of informal positions, and so it's hard to have a real sense of who to go if something goes wrong. And, for example, when I was in Cote d'Ivoire, I was essentially the manager of the project. I was responsible for paying the field assistants and making sure that people were doing the work, and yet they were still comfortable asking me all sorts of ridiculous questions that were totally inappropriate. And it wasn't something that I felt I could email my advisor or the other people in charge and be like, hey, so they're asking me weird sexual questions. Can you tell them to stop? Because it's something that the assumption is that I should be able to deal with this, but there just isn't really any kind of training for how to deal with it.
Yeah. So did you find the best approach was to just be firm and, nip it in the bud and just say, sorry, that's inappropriate?
Yeah. Basically, I laughed it off for, the first month or two, but then it got so frustrating that I said, I don't want to hear this again. Stop. And once I was visibly angry, they were like, oh, okay, we're not doing anything wrong, sorry. But yeah, it was very frustrating.
I mean, it would help if training was made explicit at the beginning, and everyone was told this is not okay, and given some clear examples.
One of the cool things that's happening, at least in my department, and I would imagine in other departments, is that professionalization is being kind of built into the degree program. So, we get a course on teaching anthropology, and we have a course on grant writing. And it would be one of the things that we've sort of been talking about is a course on doing fieldwork, because it's something that's really expected for you as an anthropologist. And so I think that would be a really great, not even necessarily a course, but just you know, a half hour during orientation or something where people are told, so if this happens and if you're working in particular parts of the world, it's conceivable that it will. This is the way that you should approach the situation.
So, I, as a sort of selfish question, I guess, I really enjoyed your blog. You were updating it for a while, and then you sort of had to stop because obviously it became difficult. How has blogging helped you as an anthropologist?
Yeah, I really wish that I was able to keep blogging while I was there, but the internet situation was ridiculous. But I really like having a venue to kind of process what happened over the course of the day. One of the things that's like really frustrating is that the most amazing things become routine really quickly. So, you know, this first week you're in the forest, you're like, oh my God, I'm in the forest, and everywhere I look there are monkeys. And, you know, I saw a snake, and it's all like this really exciting, awesome thing. And then, you know, 3 weeks later, you're like, oh my God, I have to go out into the forest again. The monkeys are just going to sit and do nothing. And like, you know, things that are incredible become really boring and horrible. And so having a place where I could like, be like, okay, cool, so today this is what I thought, and actually that's really cool, even if it's not directly relevant to the research I'm doing right now. You know, there was some sort of narrative going on. You can, it gave me a place to kind of think about the bigger picture for the individual groups that I was working with. And also there's a lot of stuff that happens that's just kind of weird, that doesn't really fit into the research that you're doing, or, you know, it's not a piece of data that you can note down easily, but you know, it's just an interesting thing that happened. So.
I like the idea. You know, I think part of the difficulty of writing a PhD is that you fall in love with all of your data, and in the process of letting it go is really difficult. And just hearing you speak, I could see how blogging might help with that process.
Yeah, it reminds you of the bigger picture as well, and I can absolutely imagine people reading your wonder at the very beginning in the first couple of weeks where you're like, oh wow, I saw a snake, and just being like, wow, this is cool because, well, I think snakes are cool, and things like that, for example, you know.
Yeah, it was easier. So when I was in Peru, that was my first field experience. I was there for 5 months, and it was much easier to keep up the like, wow, this is really cool, for that 5-month period. And there was also a lot less responsibility on my part. I was a field assistant for somebody else, and so I was, you know, I had all of the like things I was supposed to do sort of handed to me, and it was a lot less intellectually exhausting. So writing a blog felt a lot easier. But even though I wasn't able to post it, I had like personal notes that I kept. I was writing in a journal before I went to bed, basically just so I had an idea of what happened that day. Those things really kind of stick together after a little while.
So we're approaching the end of our hangout. I was wondering if you had any last words that you wanted to add?
Oh goodness. Well, I don't know. I think that I've really enjoyed, you know, having, even if there's not really a big community of women active in science, you know, in my day-to-day life, and sorry, I stated that really terribly, because there's definitely a huge community of women active in science in the anthropology department and all of the people I interact with, but we're not really talking about these kind of broader STEM issues. It's more like focused on, you know, what you're doing with your research on or something like that. So having this venue to talk about, you know, what's going on in sociology or biology or all of these different things, physics, robotics, is really, really cool. So, you know, even if people are feeling kind of isolated in their own departments or, you know, something along those lines, it's good to remember that there are places where there are other people interested and concerned about the same things that you are. So thank you guys for giving me that venue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's obviously things that unite all of us that may not be obvious the very first time we look at it. But yeah, there's deeper connections. So yeah, thank you for joining us and talking about these things. And we'll follow up with an article on our website that you can see at stemwomen.net. And yeah, you can join us in 2 weeks' time for our next hangout. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.